Hello, everybody. We're joined here by International Master Kostya. I am David Pruess, GM Eugene Perelshteyn, and my name is Jesse Kraai. Today we're going to talk about 1d4. We're going to try to give some of our recommendations about how to play 1d4, different systems you can use against specific openings, and then maybe just different systems in general. So, what we'll do is we're going to switch between this scene where you can see us, and then we're going to show also this, and I'm going to then, write in what people tell me is their recommendation for each given opening. All right. Kostya, could you take it away for a second and tell us what we would like to do? And I got to set this thing up. I didn't do it quite as well as I hoped.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll probably splinter my recommendations for a lot of these lines because with David, I would say like the Catalan is a really, really interesting opening, but I'm not sure if I would recommend it to people that are just starting out. I think if you're just starting out and you're looking for something to play, then either E4 or I would even say something like the London system, totally acceptable. If you just want something safe and easy and just get the game going. Might not be the best thing long term. People are already killing me in the chat. I can feel it.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But it's if you literally just started playing, chess in the last couple months, and it's you're just a total beginner, then by all means just get your pieces out and get a game. But let's say for club players, I would go with I guess Carlsbad, Knight C3, the classical stuff.
Okay.
And then for, let's say, players, maybe, I think 1800 and up, I would go with the Catalan. I think that's a good choice.
Okay. Kostya, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so my thoughts on the QGA have kind of changed over the years, but last couple of years, I've just been feeling that 3e4 is the way to go. I think this is just the critical move, and I don't think white really has to know that much to make it work. Whereas after knight f3, I've often felt black can get a pretty comfortable game if they're just familiar with a lot of the typical ideas. Actually, going back really quick, just because I didn't really mention it, I feel the Catalan at a certain level, there's a certain sweet spot where it's very overpowered for white. It's I would estimate it maybe 1900 to 2100. If you're playing the Catalan at this range, it's really difficult or much harder, I think, for black to play those positions than for white. And so if you have this understanding of the initiative and how to use the diagonal and sack pawns and all this stuff, you can really score, I think, a lot of wins, very specifically in that range. Below that level, I feel you might not be ready for the Catalan. And then above that level, people are better at defending. So that's kind of I just wanted to mention that real quick. But yeah, for the QGA, I would just go with E4. If you really need to learn some theory, you can take a look at the newer Avrik book, but I don't think it's really that much white has to know there. I would just play it and learn through trial by combat.
Okay, fair enough.
Don't read opening books. Don't.
Okay, so Kostya, why don't you take it away while I'm writing this in?
Yeah, so personally, I have been playing the E3 Slav for quite some time with knight F3.
So three knight F3.
Right. And then for E3. And I found that one flexible. I'll put it on the board. You can bring it up whenever. So I found this pretty flexible because then the other knight can go to D2 in a lot of lines. And yeah, we're not really giving up the C4 pawn. But I'm not sure if I would recommend this for everyone because I think it does kind of require a pretty good understanding of a lot of different positions and transpositions. And yeah, I don't really want my students studying a bunch of move orders and theory and stuff like that. So I don't know if I would really recommend this one for the masses, but I do like it for myself personally. So I think I would go with either the main line, as you guys have said, or the exchange. I think is also totally playable.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Kostya, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so I'm totally with you, Jesse. Like the Queen C2 Nimzo, I found that those positions are tough for white to play. Personally, I go back and forth. I'll play some Knight C3 these days and some Knight F3 on move 3. Well, I guess what the main thing I want to say is that, yeah, the main advantage of playing the Nimzo is that you get all these like added benefits. So, okay, of course you avoid the Queen's Indian, but then you get all the best lines against the Benoni, and as well as you get the exchange Carlsbad versus with Knight F3, black gets kind of an improved QGD. Right. I think for lower levels, I would actually encourage them to play into the Nimzo, let's say like below 1800. So I think all these things are worth it just to simplify the repertoire. And the line I would recommend is actually playing Queen C2, but without A3, but just like Queen C2, Knight F3, like Bishop G5, this kind of thing. I think that's actually very straightforward for white, and it's similar to like, you know, QGD or Rogozin or something like that. And yeah, not getting too hung up on like trying to grab the bishop pair. I'm totally with you guys that those positions just aren't worth it and are like way too subtle. Like Magnus does a really good job in those positions. Like that's about it. He's the only player I've seen who was successful. And then for higher levels, I would suggest to transition over to 3 Knight F3. I think it's kind of like more flexible move.
Okay, Kostya.
Yeah, so I'll definitely go with the main line against the Queen's Indian, the G3 lines. In case anyone is curious, against the Bishop A6, like kind of theoretical stuff, I like the simple move B3, although there's other options there as well, like the Queen C2 pawn sack lines are yeah, really interesting as well. So you have this option and then this one.
And you like the B3?
Yeah, here I would probably go with B3 myself, just because I feel like, I mean, it's a very real pawn sacrifice after Queen C2, and I don't love having to like memorize a bunch of theory to get like an equal position where I have compensation. I just feel like there's not quite enough upside here if black knows what they're doing. But at like lower levels, I think there's definitely a lot of danger here. So this one could be worth studying.
Oh yeah, Queen C2 is definitely a good move. And I just say for the black players listening that if you're playing this, you can play both Bishop A6 and Bishop E7. They're both beautiful moves. They're both beautiful moves, you know. Okay, good. Let's go.
But I want to mention as well, because we don't really have Benoni on our list, but people might be wondering. So if you play the Nimzo move order, then yeah, you get access to all these fantastic lines. The one I would recommend personally is the one with E4 and Knight GE2.
That's an old line.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this one. I think it's like really easy for white to play based on putting the knight on G3 and then discouraging black from being able to play F5. And then I guess one of the key ideas here is that when black goes like H5 to harass the knight, white usually plants this bishop on G5. So I've played this one personally like a million times, and I really like these positions. It also kind of syncs up nicely if you're a Samish player in the King's Indian, because you can play F3 in these positions, and basically it's like a direct transposition. So for a while I was playing the Samish King's Indian, and I would play this line against the Benoni, and it would really work out quite nicely. But if you are a Knight F3 player, and you're faced with the Benoni, you got to do something else, unfortunately. I remember when the Bishop F4 lines were so popular.
Yeah.
They were like more popular than Bitcoin. It was like everyone was studying these lines. It was crazy. I don't know where they stand right now, but these lines have always made sense to me. I think white is pretty comfortable here. But I also have a soft spot for Knight D2. I feel like these lines are kind of always interesting for white to play. With this kind of grip on the light squares with A4 and Knight C4 coming. So these are totally playable too.
Right.
Yep, it's all hell.
Okay, Kostya, what do you got?
Yeah, so I just want to say, like, I'm really happy hearing you guys like talk about the King's Indian like this, because it makes me feel like one of those directors for like those horror movies, like the Hostel movies, when
Uh-huh.
these articles come out like, oh, this is the most disturbing movie of all time. How could anyone watch this? And the directors are like, yes. Like, please. Like, oh yeah, I would love for people to go into these positions like all the time against me as a King's Indian player. This is like, I guess, you know, it kind of comes back to why the exchange systems are annoying, is because like you don't get your like pet structures that you really want. So I don't know, King's Indian is a really tough one because like I think a lot of it just depends on the players at hand. I think what happens often is like the D4 player is avoiding complications in the King's Indian and not willing to kind of like punish and really put pressure, and then as a result the counterattack comes a little bit too quickly, and then yeah, black ends up doing, I think, really well in practice. Certainly as a D4 player myself, I struggled against the King's Indian quite a bit, especially going into like these main lines where I was trying to like memorize a lot of moves of theory, and like, yeah, Stockfish or, you know, Ripka back then was giving me 0.8. Nowadays it's like 1.5 you get. Back then you got like 0.8, and I was like, oh man, how could anyone do this against me? And then I would like resign in 25 moves. So my results improved when, number one, I started playing the King's Indian myself. So I kind of got a better understanding of what I don't want to see as a King's Indian player. But what I would recommend is either one of the, let's call them like the king side counter-attacking systems. So F3, if you're kind of like, let's say 1800 or below, maybe 2000 and below. I like these positions because you basically you just play Yugoslav attack. Going back to last week, you go bishop e3, queen d2, castle queenside, bishop h6. I think at lower levels this is like really annoying for most King's Indian players. Students that I've had to play the King's Indian, they usually struggle against this stuff until they get like some good experience. Because even if white just kind of plays, you know, superficially like h4, h5, and g4, a lot of times they can just still get a really potent attack. Personally, I'm a big fan of playing f3 and knight ge2 because I like keeping the bishop flexible, like in those Benoni lines. It's important for me that white can put the bishop on g5 in one tempo rather than committing it to e3. But that's just kind of my personal preference. There's lots of different ways of playing these positions. If you want something that's a little bit kind of, yeah, you're not going all out for the queen or king side attack and like these double edge positions, you can play knight e2 and I think play for a very like simple and stable edge. And I also want to give a shout out to the h3 system. I did a video for this on our YouTube channel, specifically with playing h3 and bishop e3. I think this is a really dangerous system nowadays, but I think you really have to be an experienced d4 player. So I wouldn't recommend this to just anyone, but if you're like 2000 and up and you watch my video obviously and look at the ideas, then I think this is a really dangerous one, especially if they go into kind of like these typical King's Indian structures where you can close down the center and then play g4 and importantly bring this knight to g3 rather than on f3. So that's kind of the nuance with this h3 and bishop e3 line. So this one is also super tricky. So for me, you can put 4 f3 / yeah h3. I think totally reasonable. And as a last tidbit, if you're struggling against a Grunfeld and you want something sharp, you can play f3 in this position and then combine that with the Samish King's Indian, and you kind of get like a 2-for-1 deal here.
Right. Yeah. Okay, you guys, I created this show just so that Eugene would have to tell us what we should be playing against the King's Indian. All right,
well,
Eugene,
I am very opinionated about this topic, so here we go. So first of all, if you're a club player, right, probably under 2000, and if you go into one of those Mardel-Plata variations, or the So variation, any variation where you allow black to have this, as Jesse likes to say, Death Star attack.
It's a Death Star, yeah.
Right here. Like, if you allow that, to me, that's game over. Because you take Wesley So against Nakamura game, Wesley So got crushed. Checkmate. And the guy is top 5, top 3 in the world, Wesley So. So how could mere mortals understand the subtleties if Wesley So gets crushed by Hikaru? So I would be scared to be white. Like, no matter how much memorization I will do here, I see this Death Star coming toward me, and with this knight's coming in, and like I could be winning like a pawn, knight, rook on the other side of the board, and I'm gonna get checkmated. No good. So I would recommend avoid this king on G1 and this Death Star by any means necessary. So do what Kostya does, play H3, play the Averbach, Bishop E2, G4, play F3, the Semish, but don't allow any of this. So,
actually, I just want to add, the Fianchetto is also a very safe system for white if you're looking for something really simple and solid. Actually, Fianchetto.
Exactly.
Really,
that's a very positional, especially if you're loft positional chess with the bishop on G2. That's a relatively easy one to not get mated.
That's great. Okay, so you want me to write like how about I write H3 in there for you there?
Yeah, or you can just say avoid.
Avoid it. Just avoid it.
Avoid the Death Star.
Avoid the Death Star.
That's pretty much any system. And then the Gligorich system is actually very clever. I'll show you why it avoids the Death Star. It's this bishop E3 move.
Yeah.
Because people don't realize that the insertion of bishop E3 before you commit the king is a huge improvement. For example, knight C6, D5, knight E7, knight D2, right? And then black just basically plays the same exact way, knight D7 or knight E8. This is a very serious positional problem for black because the king, right, is not committed to G1.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say I play B4. You play something like this. I'm going to go here. You're going to go there. I'm going to go there. And you're just going to continue. Like, actually, I played around with the Gligorich system against people like 2300s. And they just went for this Death Star against me. And I laughed in their face. And my king can castle the other way.
Yeah.
And you play for this and just domination. With knights.
I've won a million games like this too, Eugene. That's why my sort of secondary recommendation is between the exchange and the Gligorich.
Yep.
And I play Queen C2 before B4. So there's
you want to avoid something?
Well, there's one more move for them to do their F5, F4 stuff. And if I'm going to castle queenside, I don't need to play B4, right? So people play this F5, F4 thing against me, and then I play G4 in that position after they've played F4. And in that position, if they don't take en passant, then you could castle kingside later, and the kingside will be locked. And if they do take en passant, then you just destroy their king. So
I think people don't understand, and no engine is going to tell you that. In King's Indian, the weakest point of white's position is his king. Like with the king on G1, that's your weakest point. And the engine doesn't get that because engine doesn't see any maiden attack 20, 30 moves in advance, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a horizon effect. And when you have strong engines playing in these tournaments, you rarely see black actually losing in the King's Indian. Like, for example, if you have like Stockfish 12 or Leela take black in these Death Star positions, usually against weaker engines, they actually win a lot of games with some amazing attack, usually with sacrifices, just like Nakamura against Wesley. So this approach I would not recommend for white. To castle early kingside. Any bishop E3 move, even here, like let's say you already committed the king, I don't recommend to lock things up with D5. Like the bayonet attack is very popular at the grandmaster level, still too complex for club players. I would just probably recommend something simple like bishop E3 here.
Now, I think what we have to address is the trauma that even Eugene feels about you can tell at some point in his career he got mated. And I think one thing that's interesting about the King's Indian is, at least I'll just speak for myself, is that I've lost a lot of games with all kinds of openings, but the ones that I really remember is when someone came and spanked my king in the King's Indian, and it was so traumatic and has stuck with me so long that the fear is like really deep, it's really deep. And the thing that's, great about the King's Indian is the engine won't help you. So, whatever system you do, realize that the engine isn't going to be great. It'll see a space advantage, but if you leave it sitting long enough in these positions and go down the main lines, it'll start saying, oh man, it's not so easy.
The biggest victim is Boris Avrik, growing up with Smirin. Can you imagine just getting mated game after? I think he writes that in his books, actually. That's why he picked up like the Fianchetto systems, because he's just tired of getting mated.
I played the Fianchetto system. I still got like attacked on the king side.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's they figured it out. You know.
I think not castling is really the best. I think, as Eugene says, like if you don't put your king on G1, that's the best way to avoid getting checkmated on G1.
That's true.
So I think that's also where the exchange system comes in, because a lot of black players like, oh man, I wish I have this beautiful Death Star attack. Now I have to play some boring endgame. And obviously, you know, at the Grandmaster level, the exchange is analyzed to a draw. But at a club layer, the exchange is such a rare guest that white can actually score a lot of wins. I think Jesse won a lot of games in the exchange.
Well, that wasn't quite the club player level.
And you know, I'll say about the exchange, it's very dynamic. It is really not dull. In fact, I guess the way I would characterize it is, for example, I think black's best move here is c6, is that white has actually sacrificed a lot of his structure because he is doing double time on d5 and black gets to control both squares. But in compensation for that, he has a development advantage. So it's a very dynamic imbalance that happens that, you know, you can learn how to play well. And black should be just happy in the sense that if he survives, if this development advantage goes away, then black will simply be better. So it's definitely not some dull symmetrical thing that happens here. And I'll say, when I decided to do this, it was definitely psychological, and it definitely helped me become a GM, is that I just knew that the King's Indian players wouldn't like it. That was the main thing. I knew they wouldn't like it. So that was part of it. And I liked playing endgames as well. Yeah.
And that's the segue for my approach to the King's Indian, because I hate it so much. That's where my knight a6 comes in.
Oh, yeah.
So now after castle, after e5, this endgame is actually not as bad, right? Because now the knight is going to come in. I'm still going to play c6, and it's unclear whether you want the king here or on e1, or sometimes even castle queenside.
Right.
So this sort of makes my life a little bit easier as a black player. And that's why I face a lot of people who play after castles e5. They play d5, I'm happy. They play bishop e3, I'm happy. And if they take, I'm happy. So that's where my knight a6 comes in.
Right. And Eugene, I should just note, has been playing this knight a6 thing forever, at least 20-some years.
Before it got popular.
Yeah.
I beat Nakamura with this system. I played a lot of really interesting games with this system. I feel like nowadays top GMs are using knight a6 just to kind of get a complex game, or in a must-win situation they play knight a6, because it's a little bit less studied with the knight c6, but it still has the same venom.
Right.
You played knight a6 against me. I'd never even seen it before.
That's right. In the World Open.
Okay. Good. So let's move on to the Grunfeld. I was so happy to find my umlaut. I was never able to do the umlaut for ages, and I finally got the umlaut in there. All right, Kostya, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll go with the same. Actually, I'm a fan of the knight f3, bishop e3 stuff. I think the lines are pretty straightforward. Kind of like David was saying, you know, white's pretty happy if you just get the center. So it almost doesn't even matter which positions you play. You can go like bishop c4 and knight e2 as well. I think those are certainly very playable. Yeah, lately Magnus's games were really interesting in this one against like MVL and Mamedyarov and Grischuk. So I would encourage folks to check out those games. Yeah, I mean, Grunfeld is definitely a really tough nut to crack, but you can get positions that you feel like as a d4 player are pretty comfortable and give you a chance to fight for some space and some initiative. If you can use the space advantage, you can do, I think, really well against the Grunfeld. So certainly a lot of room there. It's not something like I'm much more bothered by like the Slav, where it's really hard to even get an illusion of an advantage.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Kostya, what do you think? You probably have some ideas against the Dutch.
Yeah, I don't mind bishop g5. I think it's kind of a fun line. I personally would go for and recommend the lines with just 2 g3 and waiting to develop the knight until black chooses their setup. So again, something like the Leningrad, I would go for c4, and then at this point, I'm fine with knight f3. and I would go for these setups with knight c3. And yeah, in general, I just feel like the Dutch isn't just the healthiest of openings, because in the long run, you're just always worried about this diagonal, and like, yeah, the position opens up later. The king is always weak on the light squares. You can definitely make it work, you know, if you're like you just have to be the right kind of player, you know, like it's like the Benoni in a sense. You just really have to have the right temperament for it if you're going to go for this as black. Obviously, it can work for a lot of players like Nakamura or Simon Williams, like this kind of player. But yeah, not for everyone. And as Petrosian famously said, like, if your opponent is going to play the Dutch, don't stop them, which I'm totally in favor of.
Yeah.
And I guess the one point where this nuance I think is really important in terms of the move order is if they go for the stone wall, which is like, okay, pretty solid line. Then I'm a fan of, let's say, queen c2 here, and then developing this knight over to h3 and f4. I think this is the one spot where I like to take advantage of the option to go knight h3.